cuts that have had to be done in the sectors of health, agriculture, I think education. And with that, you know, when we are doing a budget, you have to balance, because there's the revenue and there's the expenditure. Unfortunately, there's usually limited resources, and whatever demands that are required by the different ministry, different sectors, most of the times they usually exceed the resources that are available. What does that mean? It means they have to be a delicate balance in terms of allocation of the limited resources to the different ministries or departments. And with that, if you look at the budget, like for example the budget for what has been proposed, the budget for education, it has gotten a huge chunk of allocation, but almost half of it goes towards human resource related expenses, meaning the development expenditure is what it means that what the government can do is to give incentives that will spur growth, that will spur, especially let's say in the manufacturing industry, and its GDP, which is currently at 7.8% to around 20% in the year 2030. And how can they do this? They can do this by lowering the cost of industrial inputs. They can do this by having accessible and reliable energy. So just to incentivize these other departments or these other industries that can be able to spur the growth in the economy. Growth in the economy will only be realized if people have disposable income, and there will be increase in disposable income for them to spend. That is what will spur the growth in the economy. And that will only be done if the cost of production is reduced. And I've had the MP for Keses clearly talk about the manufacturing, and that is what they want to concentrate on. Okay. So if that can be done in terms of reducing the cost of production, indeed, it will spur growth by creation of jobs and all that.
Okay, thank you, CPA Esther. I remember we are also live on our social media platforms at KBC Channel 1, and also you can tag me on Twitter at WJenga. And I have some feedback from you, Kenyans, and I would like also James also to chip in on this. There's one feedback here that if the government can focus on agriculture for food security and reduce the cost of doing business, just as Esther has indicated, and have a special fund for MSMEs, the country would be fine. Do you agree, James?
I totally agree. And I want to respond to what he's saying by the very budget allocation to agriculture. I've seen a cut on it. I think when I last checked the budget policy statement, it was just shy of 100 billion, maybe about 99 billion. Into the agriculture sector. Now, the agriculture sector is one of those industries that is very hard to tax, but is also one of those industries that contribute significantly to our economy. About 33% of our GDP is from the agricultural sector. And if I look at employment, I'm looking at about 40% employed of the total population from the agricultural sector, about 70 of which come from the rural areas. But then you look at the kind of aggressive measures that have been put forward for the agricultural industries. I saw a reduced, or rather the removal of exemptions that are there for agricultural pest control products and the inputs. Measures that the government is attempting to bring into force to try and rather increase the revenue on that taxation. But I also want to link that to the national tax policy, because if you look at the national tax policy, what the national tax policy recommends is that we need to move into those add-to-tax economy and try and introduce taxes and try and collect more revenue from the taxes rather than just limiting the taxation to a few employed persons. Now, how do we or how are we able to collect the taxes from that revenue? First, it means we need to grow that industry. And to grow that industry, then we need to have more allocations towards that sector through the fund that is spoken about, and even more so on the amount that actually goes to the various departments within the ministry. If you remember back maybe about 20 years ago, we used to have what was called the Maputo Declaration, where we had members of the various African countries met to try and at least agree on how much contribution should go to the industry, and it was agreed then that at least 10% of our budget should go towards that industry to try and grow that industry. They met back again somewhere around 2014, 2015 in what they were calling the Malabo Declaration. But if I look through the contributions or the revenue or the expenditure that goes to that industry over time, I don't really think we have ever been able to attain a 10% expenditure in that industry. And these are some of the effects that in the long run make it very difficult to be able to draw taxes from that industry. If, for example, we'd be able to pump in more funds into that industry, we'd be able to ensure that the industry is well funded, then we'll be able to draw as much revenue as we'd want to the industry. Linked to that, I think, is the edible oil, because edible oil is an agricultural product. We are an importer of edible oil. I think if you look through what we import, machinery will come top, and then we'll also have edible oil, palm oil itself, which comes from Indonesia and Singapore. But then you look through the excise duty that has been put up on edible oil. It means that every household out here will be able to, the cost on edible oil will go up, and it makes it very makes it very difficult for players within that industry to put much effort into the industry. So yes, I agree with the person when he says there's very little that has been done for agriculture, and maybe perhaps we need to take more action on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Picking up from what James has said in terms of the medium-term revenue strategy, which aims to, of course, provide a framework for tax systems reforms and also boost domestic revenue, but which has also been declining over time. Rachel, if you can maybe suggest to us some of the changes, from your opinion, whether some of the changes and tax proposals we are seeing in this finance bill in line with the tax reforms proposed in the MRTS and also in the national tax policy.
Okay, thanks for that question. What I've seen from the 2024 budget, and maybe going back to 2023, 2023 was more focused on direct taxation, whereas 2024 is indirect. And 2023 we saw a lot of tax rates going up, like for individuals with the creation of 2 additional tax bands. As to whether that increased income tax collections, that's a different conversation, but from the data that you've seen, it hasn't really contributed to more tax revenue coming from that sector. So going back to the medium tax revenue strategy and what the government is trying to do to make sure that the tax collections go up, we've seen there's the issue of taxation of the digital economy. Number one, we need to be alive to the fact that a lot of transactions are happening in the digital space, and not just in Kenya, even globally. And governments all over are trying to make sure that these people who are doing business over the digital platforms are able to contribute to the tax exchequer. And what you've seen is that there was introduction of the digital service tax at 1.5%. That was like a turnover tax. And there's also a proposal to scrap that off in the 2024 finance bill and replace that with significant economic presence concept, which will translate to about 6% of the turnover. And of course, I've seen so many taxpayers complaining about that. But when you look at it, what the government is trying to do is to try and move away from the traditional tax nexus or tax presence, and now try and see what economic activities are you deriving from the country, and are you paying some commensurate tax. Closely tied to that is the issue of minimum tax. A few years ago, of course, there was the introduction of minimum tax that, of course, course, didn't see the light of day, and now it has come back through the Finance Week 2024. And now this one has taken a different shape because this one is linked to what is happening globally, and there's the concept of the global minimum tax of 15%. So what you're saying is that every entity that is operating in a country must pay at least 15% corporation tax. There's that proposal, and we will wait to see what how that ends. The other thing is the issue of the digital, or can we call them the content creators. I know there's a lot of discussions around whether these people should be paying tax or not. But when we take a look, we can see that they're doing a lot of work, they're getting a lot of money because they're doing a lot of advertising on their platforms, and we've seen big corporates even advertising through their social media pages. And of course, there was the introduction of the 5% withholding tax on the payments that they are receiving. But what needs to be noted is that the 5% is not final tax, because what we are saying is that our tax legislation captures or catches income of a person. For instance, if that content creator is earning maybe 100,000, for example, in a month, and an employee is getting paid 100,000, remember the employee will be taxed on the pay-as-you-earn system, and is that these people have not been paying tax. Like for that example of the content creator, he will earn his 100,000 and maybe not tax. So what you are saying is that for us to ensure that everyone contributes to this kitty, then whoever is earning an income must be able to be pay tax, or our systems should be able to catch those people so that everyone contributes to the exchequer.
Okay, and we'll delve deeper into the wide array of taxes and administrative measures that are affecting different tax laws, and we'll be looking at that later on. But coming to you, James, earlier this week I had a conversation with the Principal Secretary for National Treasury, Chris Kipto, and he talked about these new tax measures, saying they were informed by, of course, the public debt, and he insisted that it must be reduced. And I'll quote him in terms of what he said. He said, "We have no room to take on more debt." And this is what is forming Finance Bill 2024. And we have a 3-year internal mechanism that we can achieve by only increasing domestic revenue and cutting expenditure. But when you look at how the government, in terms of expenditure, do you think it's balancing the need for increased revenue and also with the potential burden on taxpayers?
Now, if I look through that question and I look through the kind of statement that the Principal Secretary made, and it also goes in line with what they were attempting to ask the committee on the departmental committee on finance and national planning to try and ensure that the finance bill is passed as they want. I think critically looking at it, our debt expenditure. Allow
me to cut you short, James. We're going to head straight to the National Treasury, where the CS is currently speaking to our reporter, Alan Oko.
Major, could I say, undertaking for us, because as the National Treasury and all MDAs are involved in this, because it is our job to summarize our, let's say, government institutions, including regulators, are saying, and we summarize it into what is called the budget. But in that summary, we are also summarizing what are the resources available, because everybody is looking at the resources. So and what are the revenue-raising measures? Of course, in the end, everybody tries to look at the revenue-raising measures without looking, first of all, their policies and programs. That's where we are. Let me say this, maybe as an opening statement, is that we have come from a very, very, very difficult period. And we are happy that with the leadership of His Excellency President William Ruto and his deputy, Honorable Rigathi Gachagua, they have stabilized the economy. We have come from very difficult times. We have seen some few signals which are very, very strong. For example, the 2023 growth, economic growth was actually 5.6%. We have seen inflation coming down to 5%, to its target level in April. In May, it went to 5.1%, which is actually not significant. So it means that inflation has come down to its target. We have seen stability in the exchange rate, in the nominal exchange rate. The nominal exchange rate is the national relative price, so it tells us about stability in the totality of the economy. And there are so many other aspects that we can relate to. That tells us that there is a very strong, should I say, very strong evidence that economic recovery has started, starting from the last quarter of 2023. But it is also a very fragile recovery, given the way you have seen the shocks from 2021, the COVID, 2020, the COVID, 2021 to 2022, there was massive. We haven't seen that drought in 40 years. 2023, El Nino hit us very hard. 2024, floods are still continuing. Go back a little, then 2021, 2022, supply constraints, 22, global dollar shortage, and you can see all these, we lump them as negative shocks. They are persistent because we don't even know when they end, isn't it? And they create some permanent effect in the economy. In fact, one of the estimates is to show that we have been reversed. We have reversed our 20 years effort in terms of poverty reduction and the inequality. The drought itself affected not only household inequality but also regional inequality in a big way. It is one of the most catastrophic issues that you can deal. So what are we saying? We are saying strong evidence of economic recovery. But that recovery is fragile. It has to be supported. Strong policies, strong policy reforms, strong programs, and very, very strong and targeted interventions. Interventions to correct virtually everything. This is how to put, that is the way we need to support it. You can imagine, for example, right now, every time we turn, what is one of the damaging, or should I say, severe problems that we face? Debt, isn't it? We have to solve it with different dimensions. The most important thing is to realize that every time the budget is mentioned, everybody talks about taxes, revenue measures, revenue-raising measures. But that is just one component. You're asking yourself, why do we raise revenue? There is one problem. There is one problem I want to emphasize, but it is not one problem. It is actually one problem in three problems. We call them trilemma. There is a one dilemma, but composed of three dilemmas, so we call it a trilemma. One of the things is that everything and everywhere you turn, everyone wants government to spend more, to increase expenditure. We want roads, we want electricity, healthcare, education. So everybody wants the government to spend more. But for government to finance those aspects, healthcare, infrastructure, electricity, education, all those, it requires a lot of revenue. The only way you can finance that is through tax revenue or debt. Debt has, the second problem is that you have limitations in terms of debt. Debt today can be income, but debt tomorrow is going to be an expenditure. The third problem is that if you can't finance those revenues or those expenditures through debt, then you have to finance them through taxes. And everyone resists high taxes. So that's why we call it a trilemma, or a three-dimensional problem. It's one problem in three problems. But we are going to overcome by looking at moderate ways of trying to solve the problem. So the budget today is going to emphasize on the policies that we need to implement, policies, programs, and intervention to implement to support that fragile growth, that fragile economic recovery. We want to make sure that we revive the economy so that it can generate jobs for the youth. And that's where we are. Simple as that. We want to revive the economy so that we can pay our debt. We have been buffeted by debt, and everybody has seen us moving from moderate risk to high risk of debt distress, isn't it? So essentially, it is something you read, you write in the papers every day. So we are confronting all these problems. And on top of that, we have to build roads, we have to support hospitals, And that's why we are reforming even the hospital, the universal health care. There's the school program. We have a new school program. We have a financing model. And we all have to support that in terms of resources. So in a sense, what we are doing is to summarize all that we have got from both MDAs and government institutions, plus the private sector, and then public participation in terms of what they have brought to us. That's what we summarize, that's what we present. But this year's budget, we want to emphasize two things. First, we have to protect that economic recovery. We can only protect that economic recovery through policy reforms, through the diverse measures of raising revenues, through programs and through interventions. Okay, that is the most important thing. The second thing is that we have to, the policy reforms must go in different dimensions. With some of you, I don't know whether you look at data. If you look at our exports, manufacturing exports, there has been a secular decline of manufacturing export. It means that it is very difficult for the manufacturing sector to increase jobs. So in a sense, we have to look at it in terms of how do we resuscitate our exports. One of the points that has been very, very adequately talked about, and even ourselves in the National Treasury, is that we have to develop, protect, and regulate markets. Because once markets are not well regulated, they are not well governed, they collapse. They collapse with Kenya's investments. And there is no more investment in that sector. It means that poverty hits very hard. For some of you, you have written papers and articles on that. Look at the coffee sector. Look at the sugar sector. Look at the cotton sector, subsector. Wherever markets have collapsed because of poor governance, you know poverty has struck, investments have been lost, it has been very difficult to revive. Pyrethrum, okay, all those. That is one of the most important. So when I talk about policies, programs, and interventions, those are the issues that we are talking about. So markets governing is an intervention that is required. Hustler Fund is an intervention because we want to reorganize that market. We want to make sure that people move out of the bondage of, what are they called, Shyrocks, eh? The Shyrock is from the Merchant of Venice. I don't know why they say Shyrock, but it's a bondage of financial distress. We want to make sure that we have some interventions. So when we talk about, we need very strong policies, we need strong programs aimed at targeting different programs. By the way, when we talk about programs, we are also they are targeting programs. We want to target the youth. We want to target those people in the bottom of the pyramid in terms of what they need. That's why the Hustlers Fund is very, very important. So when we start by talking about bottom-up economic transformation agenda, you already know that bottom-up because majority of the Kenyans have been left behind, where markets have failed them, where policies have failed them, where government has not been able to invest in areas that they want, and we want to reverse all that. And those are the issues. I wanted to make those 3 points maybe so that you can have a feel that when budget making is not about taxes. Taxes comes in to say, after saying you are going to do all this, how are you going to finance it? Now,
all right, volunteers, maybe one of the things that has generated a lot of conversations is looking at the amount of this budget that is going towards recurrent expenditure versus development. So if you could tell us, are you concerned about that as the National Treasury when we have recurrent expenditure consuming close to 70% or more than 70% of the country's budget?
Actually, 3/4 of the budget discussions, if you ask these two guys with me, has been just that. How do you balance out? Because, look, many years back, when I was the governor of the central bank, I used to argue that even in times of crisis, make sure that you do not devour the development spending because you limit capacity for future growth. That logic is still there. That's why we are saying those interventions is to protect the development expenditure. Because once you devour development expenditure, it means that you limit yourself in terms of future capacity for growth. That is why we are talking about interventions, to make sure that we safeguard some of these issues. That is why we really need that balance. But we go back to the trilemma. We go back to the trilemma. That is, I don't want to call it trilemma. You know, I just want to say it is a major problem. It is one problem, but with 3 dimensions or with 3 faces, isn't it? We want more revenues to spend. But how do we raise more revenue to spend? It's either through taxes or debt. The second problem, you have a limitation with how much debt you can carry, isn't it? The third one is that since taxes is the only one that is left now in that space, how much taxes can you raise? We also have resistance in terms of taxes. So what we are trying to do, and to answer your question, is that we are moving in a direction where we want to make sure that we have domestic resource mobilization that is amenable to the development space that we want. And we want to make sure that we remit our tax expenditure to build up a revenue base or a tax base, and also reorganize. We are trying to reform all dimensions of taxes to try and see how we can raise revenue. Mostly looking at the hard-to-tax economy. And this is some things that we are going to talk about. So in a sense, we are conscious about that. Half of the work that we do is how do we support development spending? How do we create that balance?
Okay, buenos dias. My name is Ndugu from KTN News. 2 questions. The first one is, you've spoken about policies and a wider approach towards reforms. It's not just budget, but we can't ignore the impact.
We can't ignore?
We can't ignore the impact of the taxation element to several industries. For example, manufacturing. I mean, we've spoken to manufacturers over the discussion on Matters Finance Bill. Some of them are closing up. They are thinking about relocating. How do we counter that?
There is nothing like closing up or relocating. This is a political agenda. Let me tell you, everywhere you go, we try to balance out policies so that nobody feels disadvantaged. Okay? That is a hearsay that you're talking about. Let me tell you, there is nowhere in Kenya that you have raised taxes to the point where farms can close down. Give me an example. I've been living in this country. I've done most of the policy work in my own individual capacity, and I can tell you I have all those. Don't forget, I would like you to go and read the book that we developed in 2002 when Kenyans were so depressed, and it is restarting and sustaining growth in Kenya. You read that, and you'll tell me what you have said is incorrect. If you read that, there are several chapters, you realize that what you are really saying has no basis. It is the whole issue about policy is to balance policy reforms, to balance programs, and finally, to balance interventions. There is no way you can come up with policies that kill even a household or an industry. So let's move away from those points that have no even relevance, because it's not true. Who would want to do that?
For example, East African packaging industries.
That they have their own internal problems, my friend. You know, if you fail to compete in the world today, you cannot survive. Are we together? Let's not start an argument, because I can give you that lecture until cows come home. Huh? Okay?
All right, in closing, sir.
Yeah.
The issue of laughter cup, in regards to...
Yes, Njuguna there talking to, addressing the media right there about the budget, talking about an economic recovery that you have seen in the last 2-3 years, but he painted a picture for us in terms of how the economy has grown in the last couple of years, talking about how inflation has come down to about 5.1% as of May. Remember, this was just a marginal increase from 5% that was recorded in April. And he was just defending the tax proposals or the tax measures that have been proposed in the Finance Bill 2024 and why we need those tax measures in order to grow our economy as well as address emerging issues and also address the public debt. I'll take a short commercial break and then we come back to the guests right here in studio as they get to react to what the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury has said.
See you. unajua token meter yako inahitaji system update. Ni rahisi na ni free. Ukipata ujumbe kutoka Kenya Power, yani SMS, weka kodi ya kwanza kureset, alafu weke kodi ya pili kuupdate. Update token meter yako. Ujumbe huu umeletwa kwako na Kenya Power and Lighting Company.
Kikohozi cha muda wowote, kutokwa na jasho kwa wingi usiku, uchungu kwenye kifua, afya kudhoofika, tafuta matibabu.
Tuseme tu namna hii, nikupatie 50 pop saa hii, utakataa?
Siwezi chukua. Unanipa za nini?
Pesa mtu anakataa.
Na kuzo utanipa za nini?
Yaani Kenya mzima ulitembea ukakosa wakili.
Sasa ndani ya estate mahali sisi naishi. Si kila mtu anaita wewe wakili. Hata watu tasituka sana saa ile hawa tabundua. Kumbe wewe ni mtu ya kunyang'anya watu, ni nyang'anyi.
Kimwa TB waishi poa. Kimwa TB waishi poa.
The phone calls and the text messages. Yeah, for the last 72 hours.
They will be suspicious, Alice.
Can you stop micromanaging?
Eye on the goal.
You have to promise that you will not tell anyone.
You can trust me.
I need every detail. Kila kitu, umesikia? You can trust me. Good.
Boat mission, sawa. Yeah, I got what I wanted.
I know exactly who you are, George. That's nice. I think I need to get going.
Sit down. I said you can leave. And I said, sit down.
As long as it does not involve someone dying, I